The colony world of Vera 9 was quiet at night, its twin moons casting silver light over the endless alien forest. Ethan walked carefully through the dense undergrowth, his boots sinking into the soft moss that glowed faintly in the dark. He was a field researcher, sent to collect samples of strange plants that only bloomed when the moons were full. For weeks, he had studied the wild animals of this planet. But tonight, something felt different. The air was heavy, the silence broken only by the distant cries of nocturnal creatures as he bent to collect a glowing flower. He heard a sound of faint whimper, half growl, half cry. It wasn't like any alien beast he had catalogued before. He froze, scanning the forest, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. There, by the roots of a massive tree, lay a figure, curled tightly, trembling at first, Ethan thought. It was some kind of animal, a predator in pain. But as he moved closer, Kay realized it was not an animal at all. It was a girl, no, not fully human. Not fully beast. Her body was slender, but strong, covered in fine fur that shimmered silver blue under the moonlight. Her ears were long, feline, twitching at every sound, and her eyes, large, glowing emerald, watched him with both fear and defiance. A tail flicked weakly behind her, her breath ragged, her arm bleeding from a deep wound. Ethan's heart raced. He had read the research logs, heard the rumors whispered among scientists. They spoke of a wild alien cat species said to be untamable, hostile to all forms of human contact. And yet, here she was, living proof. But so vulnerable, he knelt slowly, careful not to startle her. Easy. I won't hurt you, he whispered. The alien girl bared her sharp teeth, a warning growl rising in her throat. Ethan stayed still, lowering his flashlight, showing his empty hands. Minutes passed in tense silence. Then something strange happened. Instead of attacking, the girl tilted her head and let out a low, soft sound, a purr. Not a hiss, not a growl, but a purr. Ethan blinked in shock. The scientists had always said her kind only hissed, roared, or clawed at humans, never showing affection, but the sound was unmistakable, gentle, rhythmic, directed only at him. He dared to inch closer. Pulling out a small medkit from his pack, the girl's eyes followed his movements. But she did not strike. When he pressed a bandage gently to her wound, she flinched, then amazingly relaxed. Her purring grew louder, echoing in the quiet forest. Ethan felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. Why was she allowing this? Why him? Back at the research facility, scientists had tried everything to approach her species: traps, tranquilizers, even food offerings. But none of it worked. They were wild, untouchable, and now were reasons no one could explain. One of them was letting a human touch her. Ethan studied her face, noticing how her eyes never left his. There was intelligence in them, not just animal instinct. It was as if she was choosing to trust him, and only him. The realization shook him. This wasn't just science anymore. This was something personal. When he tried to lift her, she didn't resist. Her small body felt light in his arms, her head resting against his shoulder. Her purring continued, steady and soft, vibrating through his chest. Every step back to the facility was heavy with questions. What would the scientists say when they saw this? They would be shocked, maybe even angry. He knew how the labs worked. Anything unusual became an experiment. Would they see her as a subject, a specimen to dissect? Or would they see what he was seeing now, living being who could feel, who could choose? He tightened his grip around her, silently promising himself he would protect her. By the time he reached the gates of the facility, the guards stared in disbelief. Is that? One of them gasped. Ethan didn't answer. He simply walked past, carrying the alien girl who purred softly in his arms. Inside, alarms went off. Scientists rushed to see. Whispers filled the hallways. She's supposed to be impossible to tame. Someone muttered, Why is she calm? Another whispered, but no one had an answer. Ethan carefully laid her on the examination bed, and the moment he stepped away, she hissed and clawed at anyone who came near. Yet when he returned, she settled instantly, curling up like a child. Beside him, the scientists were speechless. Their data, their theories, all shattered. This alien girl trusted no one but him. She only purred when he was close, and Ethan, staring into her glowing eyes, knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, he felt it. This was not just a discovery. It was a bond, a mystery that would shake the world, and perhaps change the future of two species forever. The facility was alive with noise. Whispers echoing in every corner. Scientists pressed against glass walls, their eyes wide with disbelief. The alien cat girl who had terrified everyone for months lay quietly now, her head resting on her folded arms, purring softly, but only because Ethan sat beside her. When anyone else approached, she hissed, her claws flashing, her emerald eyes glowing with anger. Yet when Ethan reached out, she pressed into his touch like a lost child. They had given her a number, a code, like she was just another test subject. But Ethan had already named her in his heart. Lyra. It felt right mysterious. Soft and strong, just like her, he whispered the name, and her ears twitched as though she understood, purring louder when he said it again. The lead scientist, Dr. Carver, watched with narrowed eyes. "This makes no sense," he muttered, scribbling. "Notes, she rejects every handler, every method, but with you, she behaves like a tamed creature." Ethan bristled at the word tamed. Lyra was not a pet. She was something more. Still, he stayed quiet, knowing if he argued, they would only push harder. Over the next days, tests were repeated again. And again, different handlers tried to feed her. She spat the food out. Snarling when Ethan held the same bowl, she leaned forward, sniffed, and ate from his hand without hesitation. They tried to inject medicine. She thrashed and fought, breaking restraints with unnatural strength. But when Ethan knelt and whispered gently, she stilled, allowing him to patch her wound. The scientists grew frustrated. "She is imprinting on him," Carver said in a low voice during a meeting. "This is dangerous." Others disagreed. "Or perhaps it is an opportunity. We must study this connection." But to Ethan, none of it felt like science. Every time Lyra purred, every time she looked at him with those glowing eyes, he felt something deeper, something no test could measure. At night, Ethan stayed with her in the observation room. She refused to sleep unless he sat nearby, her tail flicking gently across his arm. Sometimes she mimicked him, tilting her head when he did, blinking slowly as he blinked. One night, she reached out, her clawed hand brushing his. The purr in her chest was louder then, filling the silence between them. It was not just animal comfort. It felt like trust. Still, the others did not understand. Why only him? One scientist asked in frustration, her biology should not allow such selective bonding. Maybe it's pheromones. Another suggested, maybe something in his DNA matches hers. But when they tried to analyze Ethan's blood, Lyra became furious, hissing so violently that they had to back away. She pressed herself against Ethan, her body trembling, as though she feared they would take him. Ethan stroked her hair gently, whispering, "It's all right, Lyra, I'm here." Her breathing slowed, her purring returned, and slowly she fell asleep beside him. The scientists stared in silence, recording every second. Ethan ignored them, his focus only on the strange girl who trusted him more than her own survival instincts. One evening, Carver approached Ethan directly. "You realize this bond could compromise objectivity," he said sternly. "She is not a friend, not a child, not human." Ethan met his gaze, his voice calm but firm. "She may not be human, but she is not a thing either." Carver's eyes narrowed, and he walked away without answering, but Ethan knew the man was planning something. The days passed, and the bond only grew stronger. Lyra began following Ethan's every step inside the room, her glowing eyes fixed on him. When he left for meals, she would wait by the door, clawing and yowling until he returned. When he came back, she purred so loudly that it shook the glass walls. Leaving the scientists stunned, even the guards whispered in awe, calling her the wild one who loves only him. Ethan began to notice something else. She was trying to copy sounds he made, not just purring or growling, but soft, broken syllables. One night, when he whispered, "safe," she tilted her head, then made a sound almost like save. It was clumsy, broken, but clear enough to chill him to the bone. She wasn't just bonding, she was learning. And yet, the more she grew closer to Ethan, the more the scientists whispered behind closed doors. Some saw her as hope, a bridge between species. Others saw her as danger, a predator who could never be trusted. Ethan didn't care what they thought. He knew what he felt every time she purred against his chest. Every time she gazed at him with silent understanding, but in the shadows of the lab. A decision was already forming. Carver's words echoed late at night. If she trusts only him, then she is useless to the rest of us. Ethan had no idea that plans were being made, plans that would test how far he was willing to go to protect the bond he had formed. For now, he only knew one thing. The alien cat girl was no longer just a subject, no longer just a mystery. She was Lyra, and she purred only for him. The first bond had been made, and nothing would ever be the same again. The bond between Ethan and Lyra grew stronger with each passing day. But outside their small circle, unease spread through the facility. Scientists whispered in the corridors. Guards exchanged wary glances, and even the cleaning staff spoke in hushed voices about the wild girl who purred only for one man. To many, it was a miracle, but to others, it was a threat. Ethan noticed the whispers, though he tried to ignore them. Lyra noticed too, her sharp ears twitching whenever voices rose against him. Sometimes she growled at the walls, as if she could sense the distrust on the other side of the glass. Her instincts were too sharp, too precise, to dismiss. Ethan realized she was not only watching him, she was watching everyone. During one test, a young assistant tried to step into the room with food. Lyra hissed and swiped at the air, claws gleaming, her green eyes flashing with warning. The assistant dropped the tray and ran, his face pale. Yet when Ethan entered moments later, Lyra calmed instantly, sitting obediently beside him, purring softly. It was becoming undeniable her loyalty was absolute. But exclusive, the scientists argued endlessly. She has imprinted on him, one said. Like a cub choosing a parent. No, countered another. This is intelligence. Look at her eyes. She understands more than we think. Carver stood apart, silent, his arms folded as he watched Ethan and Lyra interact. There was calculation in his stare, a weight that made Ethan uneasy one evening. Ethan returned to the observation room carrying a small ball. It was a simple object, but when he rolled it across the floor, Lyra's eyes lit up with curiosity. She batted it back toward him, then tilted her head, waiting. They played for hours. The ball rolling between them, her movements becoming sharper, quicker, more precise. Ethan realized she wasn't just playing. She was learning his rhythm, mirroring him later that night. While Ethan rested on the bench, Lyra crawled closer. She tilted her head, then slowly blinked at him exactly the way he often did to reassure her. Ethan blinked back, surprised, and she purred in satisfaction. It was more than imitation. It was connection. He began to suspect what the others refused to admit. She was not simply a creature. She was someone. But outside the room, the whispers grew louder. They're too close, one guard muttered. What if she turns on him? She won't, another replied. Did you see the way she follows him? She would die for him. Rumors spread through the facility that Ethan was hiding something, that maybe he had done something to earn her loyalty. Some said he must be using tricks. Others whispered darker theories. Carver eventually summoned. "Ethan, for questioning, you do realize how this looks," the scientist said coldly. "She ignores every attempt at communication. Yet she responds to you as though you are her chosen one." "I never asked for this," Ethan replied, his jaw tight. "I only helped her when she was hurt. Maybe she remembers that." Carver leaned forward, his voice low. "Or maybe she is manipulating you." The words chilled Ethan. But he shook his head, refusing to believe it. That night, when he returned to Lyra, she seemed restless. She paced the room, her tail swishing, her ears alert. Then, without warning, she crouched low, her eyes narrowing on the ceiling. Moments later, a faint creak echoed through the vents. Lyra hissed, dragging Ethan aside just before a small panel fell loose. Crashing onto the floor, Ethan stared in shock. She had sensed danger before it happened. Lyra curled close to him, growling toward the ceiling, her fur bristling when he stroked her back. She calmed slightly, but her eyes never left the shadows above. It was as if she was warning him, telling him something unseen lurked nearby. The incident spread through the facility like wildfire. "She protected him again," whispered one researcher. "It's more than instinct. She's choosing him over all of us," another said bitterly. Ethan overheard fragments of these conversations, each one filling him with unease. He wondered how long it would be before someone acted against him in the days that followed. Lyra began to mimic more than just movements. She copied his tone. When he laughed, his tilt of the head when he questioned something. And once, when he whispered softly, "Safe," she repeated a broken version of the word, "sa." "F," she murmured, her purring deep and steady. Ethan's chest tightened at the sound. It was the closest she had come to speech. When he told the scientists, they didn't believe him. They demanded recordings, proof, but each time they tried to listen, Lyra went silent, refusing to utter a sound. Yet when Ethan was alone with her, she tried again, each attempt clearer than the last. It was as though she wanted only him to hear. The scientists grew more suspicious, and Ethan began to feel the walls closing in, one evening after another. Round of failed tests, Ethan sat beside her. She rested her head against his shoulder, her purr a soft vibration through his chest. "I don't know why it's only me," he whispered, "but I promise I'll protect you." Lyra blinked slowly, as if she understood, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if she was more than just a bond. Maybe she was a secret waiting to be revealed. But outside the glass, the whispers never stopped. To some, she was a miracle, to others, a danger, and in the shadows, Carver watched with cold calculation. Ethan felt it in his bones. The time would soon come when someone would try to break this bond. And when that happened, he didn't know. If either of them would survive it, the night was still inside the research facility. But Ethan could not sleep. He sat in the dim light of the observation chamber, watching Lyra curl up near the corner, her tail wrapped tightly around her legs. Her glowing green eyes were half closed, but her ears twitched at every sound. She was never fully at rest, never fully trusting of the walls around her, except when Ethan was close. Then her purring would return, soft and steady. That evening felt different, heavier, as though something unseen pressed down on the air. Ethan leaned back on the bench, rubbing his tired eyes. The silence was broken by a faint vibration underfoot. So faint most would miss it, but Lyra didn't miss it. Her eyes snapped open, ears pricking forward, her body stiff like a drawn bow. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" "Girl," he whispered. Lyra hissed low, her tail lashing. Then she darted forward. Grabbing his sleeve with surprising strength, she pulled him away from the center of the room, dragging him toward the wall. At first he resisted, confused. But then a sharp, metallic click echoed through the chamber. A moment later, a small charge hidden under a floor panel exploded. Blasting shards across the room, the force knocked Ethan back, but Lyra shielded him with her body. Claws digging into the floor for balance. Alarms screamed, red lights flashing. As smoke filled the chamber, guards rushed in, weapons raised, shouting over the chaos. Lyra crouched protectively in front of Ethan, her ears flat, her claws gleaming like blades. Ethan coughed, stunned not by the explosion, but by the truth it revealed. Someone had planted a trap. Not for Lyra, but for him. Lyra had known before it happened. Had sensed the danger and acted without hesitation. She saved his life, again. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer. This was no simple animal bond. She had chosen him completely. The scientists arrived minutes later. Chaos flooding the room. Carver barked orders. Seal the area, scan everything, find the source. But his eyes never left Lyra, who stood between Ethan and the world, growling softly. This proves it. Carver muttered. She's aware. She knew something we didn't. But Ethan saw more in her eyes than awareness. He saw intent, later. When the smoke cleared and the alarms silenced, Carver confronted Ethan in the corridor. You see? Now why this is dangerous, Carver said, his voice sharp. She is unpredictable. She responds only to use, makes her uncontrollable. Ethan clenched his fists, his voice low. Uncontrollable. Maybe? But she just saved my life. Doesn't that mean something? Carver's cold stare gave no comfort. It means she is dangerous enough to decide who lives and who dies. Word of the explosion spread fast. Guards muttered that Lyra had foreseen it, that she was no beast but something greater. Others whispered darker fears. That she was plotting, using Ethan as her shield. But Ethan knew better. He had felt her trembling after the blast, had heard the desperate rumble of her purring as she pressed close to him. She wasn't plotting, she was protecting. That night. Ethan sat in the observation room, Lyra curled against him, her chest vibrating with a steady purr. He stroked her silver-blue fur, whispering, "You saved me, Lyra." But how? Her green eyes flicked up to his, intelligent and searching, as if she wanted to answer. Instead, she rested her head against his chest. Purring louder. It wasn't words, but it was trust. The scientists grew restless, demanding more. Tests, more data, more answers. They brought new devices, scanners that buzzed and hummed. But Lyra hissed at everyone, refusing to cooperate unless Ethan stood by her side. When others tried to separate them, she slashed at the walls, her roars shaking the chamber. But when Ethan touched her shoulder, she stilled instantly, her fury. Melting into calm, it baffled everyone, but it terrified Carver the most in the cafeteria. Whispers grew into arguments. She's bonded too deeply. This is no longer science. It's a liability. One researcher snapped, "No, it's proof of a new kind of intelligence." Another countered. But Ethan heard the final words from Carver himself, spoken in a tone that chilled him. If she only listens to him, then we only need him to control her, remove him to control the outcome. Ethan returned to Lyra, unease twisting in his gut. She sensed it immediately, lifting her head and letting out a questioning sound. He forced a small smile, stroking her hair. "It's nothing," he lied, but Lyra didn't believe it. Her eyes narrowed, and she pressed herself closer, her purring louder, as if to drown out the tension around them. For the first time, Ethan wondered if she was protecting him not only from traps, but from the very people inside the facility. The next day, another test was arranged. Ethan was asked to stand outside the chamber while others entered. Lyra went wild, hissing, thrashing, her claws tearing into steel walls as she screamed a sound that rattled bones. The guards almost fired their weapons, but when Ethan rushed in, she froze. panting before collapsing against him in exhaustion. The scientists stared in stunned silence, their theories crumbling. Ethan held her close, his heart pounding, Lyra's claws retracted, her trembling form pressing against him like a frightened child. Her voice was soft, almost broken, as she let out a sound that could almost be mistaken for a word. "Stay," she murmured, barely audible, before slipping into a restless sleep. Ethan's breath caught she had spoken, even if only one word. The silent warning had come. Not from the explosion, but from her. A warning that she was more than they believed, more than they feared, and Ethan knew then that the real danger was not Lyra at all. The danger was what the scientists would do once they realized she was becoming something greater, something that no cage could ever hold. The days after the explosion felt heavier inside the facility. Everyone walked with nervous steps, as if the air itself carried tension. Guards kept their hands too close to their weapons. Scientists argued more fiercely than before, and whispers filled the hallways whenever Ethan passed. But inside the observation chamber, a strange calm existed. Lyra stayed close to Ethan, her emerald eyes never leaving him, her purring constant whenever he was near. Ethan knew the others were growing impatient. They wanted answers. Why only him? Why only his presence calmed her? Carver especially pressed harder, demanding tests that Ethan refused. "You're letting emotions cloud your judgment," Carver said one evening, his voice sharp. "She is a subject, not your companion." But Ethan stood firm. "She's more than that. I can feel it." That night, unable to sleep, Ethan slipped into the research archives. The facility was old, filled with forgotten files, records buried under years of classified stamps. He searched through dusty drawers and flickering terminals until he found something unusual. A folder marked with a faded symbol of Lyra species. Inside were logs, records of a forgotten expedition decades earlier. Ethan read with growing shock. The documents revealed that humans had encountered Lyra's kind long ago. They were not believed to be simple predators, but intelligent beings who avoided contact. One note described them as guardians of memory, beings who formed rare bonds with chosen humans. But the files ended abruptly. Sealed under the order of higher command, Ethan's hands trembled. Was Lyra not the first of her kind to bond with a human? Had this secret been hidden, buried by those who feared what it might mean? He copied the files onto a datapad, knowing Carver would never allow this knowledge to spread. This was the secret connection the scientists were blind to. But Lyra was proving it with every purr. When Ethan returned, Lyra stirred from her sleep, her eyes focusing instantly on him. She tilted her head, sensing his unease, and pressed her hand against his chest. The vibration of her purring filled the room. "Steady and strong, you knew, didn't you?" Ethan whispered. "You've known this bond was more than science." Her ears twitched, and for a heartbeat, he swore she almost smiled. In the days that followed, Lyra tried harder to mimic him, not just his movements, but his sounds. When Ethan said safe, she whispered, "Safe," clearer this time, her eyes glowing with pride. When he said stay, she repeated it with effort, her voice broken but strong. Every attempt felt like proof, not just of intelligence, but of choice. The scientists, however, grew more hostile. "She speaks only to him," one said bitterly. "This is not cooperation, it's obsession. She's evolving." Another countered, "Can't you see? This is communication." But Carver's voice cut through them all. "No, this is control. She controls him as much as he controls her." Ethan clenched his fists, knowing they didn't understand. The truth came one evening when a group of scientists tried to separate them. They demanded Ethan step out so they could test Lyra's reactions. The moment he left the room, Lyra went feral, roaring, slamming her claws into the reinforced glass, her eyes blazing like fire. The guards prepared to fire stun rounds, but Ethan rushed back in. Instantly, she stopped. Collapsing into his arms, her purrs desperate, as if begging him not to leave again. She is useless like this, Carver snapped later. We learn nothing if she only reacts to one man. But Ethan's heart burned with defiance. You're wrong, he said firmly. We're learning the most important thing of all that she can choose. Carver's glare was cold, his voice sharp as a blade. And that choice will destroy the research if we don't end it. That night, as Ethan sat with Lyra, he showed her the data pad with the old files. She tilted her head, her claws, tapping the screen curiously when the faded symbol of her species appeared. Her ears twitched sharply, her tail curling tight. She touched the symbol, then looked at him with eyes that seemed older than time. Her purr deepened, low and resonant. Almost like an answer, Ethan whispered. You remember, don't you? You know, this isn't the first time. Lyra didn't speak, but her gaze said enough. He realized then that the connection between them was not an accident, not random chance. It was something ancient, something buried in history, a secret. Bond meant to bridge two worlds, forgotten by humans but not by her kind. As the days turned into weeks, Lyra grew stronger. Her wounds healed completely, her movements sharper, her attempts at speech more confident. And with each step, Ethan felt the bond tighten. He wasn't just her protector anymore, he was becoming her voice, her link to a world that still wanted to cage her, but deep inside, he knew the cage wouldn't hold much longer. The whispers outside grew darker. She's dangerous, more dangerous now than ever. One voice muttered, if she's remembering something, then she's hiding it from us. Another added. Carver listened quietly, his eyes always fixed on Ethan. And Ethan felt the silent threat growing closer every day. One night, Lyra curled beside him, her purr steady, like a heartbeat. Ethan closed his eyes, whispering, no matter what they do, I'll protect you, for a moment. He thought she would remain silent, but then her voice, rough but clear, echoed softly, protect me, she whispered. Her first true words, Ethan's eyes stung with tears. His chest tight with wonder. The secret connection was no longer hidden, it was alive, spoken, undeniable, and as Lyra drifted into sleep, her head resting against him, Ethan realized the truth. This bond was no accident, no scientific anomaly. It was destiny, and soon the entire galaxy would know it. The days inside the facility turned colder, not because of the weather outside, but because of the way people looked at Ethan and Lyra. Whispers no longer hid behind walls, they came out in the open. Guards shook their heads when they passed. Scientists spoke harshly in meetings, and Carver's eyes grew darker with each report. Ethan felt the weight of suspicion closing in. But Lyra stayed close, her emerald eyes always watching, her purring a steady comfort. It was during one late-night review that Ethan overheard the truth. He had stayed behind to organize his notes when voices drifted from the adjoining lab. Carver's voice was cold, sharp. We've wasted enough time. She's uncontrollable, unpredictable, and dangerous. If she refuses to respond to anyone else, then she has no use. Another scientist hesitated, but her progress, her speech, her mimicry, this is historic. Carver cut him off. It doesn't matter. We need answers for the board, and if she won't give them, we'll dissect her and learn the answers ourselves. Ethan froze, his heart pounding for weeks. He had feared this moment, but now it was real. They were planning to end hurt, to cut open the very being who had saved his life. His hands shook. As he backed away from the door, every instinct screaming that he had little time, he had to act, and soon. When Ethan returned to the observation chamber, Lyra looked up immediately. She tilted her head, sensing his fear, and stepped closer, her hand brushing his. Her purr was shaky this time, uneven, as though she too sensed what was coming. "They're planning something," Ethan whispered, his voice tight. "I won't let them take you." Lyra's ears flicked, and for a moment, her gaze sharpened with something beyond instinct, something like understanding. The next day, the betrayal began. Ethan was ordered to leave Lyra's chamber for security inspections. He argued, but guards escorted him away, their grips firm, their faces blank. Through the glass, Lyra let out a cry so sharp it rattled the walls, clawing at the barrier, her green eyes wide with panic. Ethan shouted her name, but the heavy doors sealed between them. He was taken to a side room, held under watch through the thin walls. He heard muffled roars, the sound of metal tearing, alarms, screaming. His heart twisted with fear, every second stretching into eternity. The guards kept silent, refusing to answer his questions. But Ethan knew Carver had begun. Lyra was no longer the quiet, wounded creature they had first captured. She had grown stronger, sharper, her claws able to cut steel, her roar shaking. Foundations inside the chamber, she fought with a fury that stunned even the hardened guards. One slammed the alarm button, shouting, "She's breaking through, contain her." But Lyra wasn't attacking blindly. She was searching for him, at last. The guards rushed out to reinforce the lab, leaving Ethan alone. His mind raced, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the control panel on the wall. He remembered the old files, the warnings that her kind were guardians of memory, bonded beyond reason. If they killed her now, they wouldn't just destroy her. They would destroy something ancient, and Ethan couldn't allow that. Using stolen access codes he had memorized from late-night work, he bypassed the panel. The door clicked open and Ethan ran, his feet pounding down the corridor. Smoke filled the air, red alarms flashing, shouts echoing through the halls. He followed the roars, the sound of tearing steel, until he reached the shattered glass of the observation chamber. There, amidst broken restraints and overturned equipment, stood Lyra. Her claws dripped with sparks from shredded wires. Her tail lashed like a whip. Her chest heaved with furious breath. But when her eyes found him, the fury vanished, replaced by relief. She stumbled forward, pressing against him, purring so loudly it drowned the chaos around them. Ethan held her tight, whispering, "I'm here, Lyra. I'm here." Behind them, guards raised weapons, their hands trembling. Carver's voice cut through the noise. "Stand down, no. Don't fire. We need her alive." But Lyra turned, her eyes blazing, and with a roar she tore through the weapons like they were paper. Sparks flew. Alarms screamed. And yet Ethan saw her restraint. She never touched the men, only their machines. She was showing them a choice. She could destroy them. But she chose not to. Her claws lowered. Her body pressed once more against Ethan, purring deeply, as though to say she had nothing to fear while he was near. The facility shook with the weight of betrayal and defiance. Carver's face twisted with rage. "You can't protect her forever. Ethan, she is not yours. She is ours, property of this facility, of science itself." Ethan's voice was steady, though his heart thundered. "She doesn't belong to you. She belongs to no one. She chose me, and I'll choose her." Carver's eyes narrowed, his voice a hiss. "Then you've chosen to make yourself an enemy of progress," Lyra growled. Low, sensing the hostility, her body tensing to strike, Ethan stroked her fur, calming her, whispering, "Not now, Lyra. We'll find another way." She blinked slowly, understanding enough to still her claws, but her purr remained sharp. "Okay." Almost warning, Ethan knew what it meant. The betrayal was only beginning, and the war for Lyra's future had just started as the night dragged on. Ethan found himself locked again in the chamber, this time with Lyra at his side. The scientists had failed to separate them, But Carver's eyes told Ethan he would try again, harder. Lyra lay curled beside him, her purr soft, now tired, but constant. Ethan whispered into the silence. They'll come again, but I won't let them take you. No matter what it costs. Lyra stirred, lifting her head, and for the first time, her broken voice answered with two clear words. No. Leave, she whispered, her voice rough but powerful. Ethan's chest tightened, tears burning his eyes. She was speaking now, warning him, pleading. The betrayal in the lab had changed everything, and Ethan knew soon they would have to escape, or neither of them would survive. The facility was no longer a place of science, had become a battlefield of silence and fear. Every corridor echoed with tension. Every glance held suspicion. Every whisper carried Ethan's name. He knew the betrayal had changed everything. There was no trust left, no safety for him or for Lyra. She stayed close, her glowing green eyes sharp, her ears twitching at every sound, her purring low and steady like a warning drum. It was as if she knew the storm was about to break. Carver called a meeting that morning, his voice tight with authority. Guards filled the room, their weapons ready, while scientists sat stiffly, their notes untouched. Ethan stood at the back. Lyra pressed against his side, her tail flicking, her claws flexing. Carver's words were cold. The subject has proven uncontrollable. Her loyalty to one man makes her dangerous. She cannot be studied, she must be contained permanently. Murmurs filled the room, some voices agreeing, others horrified. Ethan stepped forward, his voice shaking but strong. She is not a subject. She is not an animal for your cages. She saved my life. She speaks, she chooses. And yet you still call her a threat. Carver slammed his hand on the table, his face red with fury. You've lost your objectivity. Ethan, you've let her manipulate you. This ends now. At his signal, guards raised their weapons, aiming straight at Lyra. Time slowed. Lyra's eyes narrowed, her claws sliding out with a metallic hiss. Her body tensed to spring. Ethan threw himself between her and the soldiers, arms outstretched. No? He shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. If you want her, you'll have to go through me. The room froze. Everyone stunned. The guards hesitated, their fingers trembling on their triggers. Lyra pressed against Ethan's back, her purring loud and furious, vibrating like thunder. Carver's voice broke the silence. Cold and cruel. So be it. If she has turned you into her shield, then you are both useless to science. His hand rose to give the final order, but before he could speak, something happened that none expected. Lyra stepped forward, her hand curling around Ethan's arm. Her voice, broken but clear, echoed through the hall. Stay, she whispered, the single word filled with strength and command. The guards faltered, lowering their weapons slightly, their eyes wide with disbelief. Scientists gasped, scribbling furiously, whispering that it was impossible. Carver's face twisted. Tricks, nothing more. She mimics him, nothing else. But Lyra's eyes locked on his unblinking, sharp with intelligence. She purred louder, then whispered again. This time 2 words, no. Hurt, the hall fell silent. Even the alarms humming in the background seemed to fade. Ethan's chest tightened, his heart hammering as he looked down at her. She wasn't mimicking. She was speaking, choosing, begging. The guards looked at one another, confusion spreading. For the first time, they questioned their orders. And in that hesitation, the power shifted. Ethan raised his voice, strong and certain. You see now, don't you? She is not an experiment. She is not a beast. She is someone. She has a voice. And she is telling you what she wants. The room erupted in arguments, some shouting for restraint, others begging to study her further. But Carver roared above them all. Silence. This changes nothing. She belongs to this lab, not to him, not to anyone. Ethan shook his head, his voice steady. No, she belongs to herself. Lyra pressed closer. Her eyes locked on Ethan, her purr softened, and then she whispered once more, the clearest word yet, choice. The single word cut through the noise, silencing everyone. Even Carver's fury faltered. His lips pressed tight as if he could not accept what he heard. The guards slowly lowered their weapons. Uncertain now, the scientists whispered furiously, half in awe, half in fear, and Ethan realized this was the moment, the line no one could cross back from. He placed a hand gently on Lyra's shoulder, whispering so only she could hear. I'll stand with you. Whatever happens, her emerald eyes glowed, and her purr deepened with trust. Carver finally broke the silence, his voice trembling with rage. You're making a mistake, Ethan. The galaxy will never accept this. They'll fear her, they'll fear you, and when they do, you'll wish you had stayed loyal to science. Ethan's reply was calm, almost quiet, but filled with steel. Maybe they'll fear her, maybe they'll fear us. But fear is not the same as understanding. She is the beginning of something greater. And I will not betray her, Lyra purred, her voice joining his with one last word. Together, she whispered, her tail wrapping around his arm. The guards lowered their guns fully. The scientists fell into shocked silence. And even Carver stood frozen, his authority shattered by a single voice in that moment. The entire facility realized the truth. She was not a subject anymore. Not a beast to be studied. She was a being who had chosen. A bond no science could explain. And Ethan had chosen her in return. The hall echoed with her purr, steady and powerful. It was not just the sound of trust, it was the sound of change. Ethan knew the road ahead would be dangerous. The galaxy might never understand. But Lyra had spoken, and the choice had been made, and with her head resting against his chest, her voice whispering together, he knew he would never walk alone again. Asterisk.